My name is Natalie Brooks, and 15 years after my own parents put me out on a curb with a suitcase and an old tin box of recipe cards, they showed up at the gate of my house asking to meet their granddaughter. They did not come to apologize. They came because they had seen my face on the cover of a business magazine, and suddenly, the daughter they threw away looked like something worth claiming again. But they had no idea that the girl they wanted to meet already knew exactly who they were and exactly what they'd done. If you're watching this tonight on your phone in bed, on a break at work, in a car in some parking lot, because it's the only quiet place you've got, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I have a feeling some of you already know a version of this story. Maybe not with a magazine cover. Maybe not with a catering company. But you know what it feels like to be told you weren't good enough for your own family. I'm also drawing a picture while telling this story, and I hope you'll enjoy the finished artwork by the time the story ends. This is the story of how I became someone they couldn't ignore. But to understand the woman standing at that gate, you have to understand the 20-year-old girl they left behind. 3 weeks ago, I was in my office signing off on a catering contract for 400 guests when my assistant told me 2 people were waiting at my front gate, refusing to leave. I didn't need to ask who they were. I recognized my mother's voice through the intercom before I even saw her face on the camera. "Natalie, please. We saw the magazine. We just want to see her. We just want to meet our granddaughter." 15 years. That was the first time either of them had said the word granddaughter out loud. I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, and for a moment I wasn't a business owner. I was 20 years old again, standing on a sidewalk in my nightgown, listening to a car door close behind me. I didn't answer them that day. I want you to understand why. And to understand that, you need to know who I was before a magazine ever put me on its cover. I grew up in a house where appearances mattered more than affection. My father, Robert, managed the largest bank branch in our town of Millbrook. My mother, Diane, sat on 3 different charity committees and insisted family photos be retaken if anyone's smile looked off. We had the kind of house neighbors slowed their cars down to look at. What we didn't have underneath all of it was warmth. The one person who gave me that warmth was my grandmother, Rose, my father's mother. She lived 2 streets over, in a small house that always smelled like cinnamon and brown butter. She taught me to cook standing on a step stool at her stove when I was 6, her hand resting over mine on the wooden spoon. "Recipes are how people remember you after you're gone," she used to tell me. "Write everything down." She kept every recipe she loved on index cards inside an old tin box with a rooster painted on the lid. When she died, I was 17. That tin box was the only thing I asked for. My parents thought it was strange that I wanted a rusted box instead of her jewelry. I didn't care. I kept it under my bed like it was made of gold. I didn't know yet that it would end up being the only inheritance that actually mattered. I was quiet in school, the kind of student teachers described as promising but unfocused. I didn't want to be a banker like my father or sit on committees like my mother. I wanted, more than anything, to open a small kitchen someday. Nothing fancy. Just a place where the food tasted like someone loved you. I met Daniel Hayes the summer I turned 19. He worked at the hardware store downtown, and he had a way of making ordinary afternoons feel like the beginning of something. We spent a year together that felt, at the time, like the start of my real life. I believed him when he said he wanted a future with me. I believed a lot of things at 20 that I don't believe anymore. When I found out I was pregnant, I was scared, but I wasn't hopeless. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor with the test in my hand, already picturing a small kitchen with a booster seat pushed up to the counter. I thought Daniel would be frightened at first, and then, eventually, happy. I was wrong about the second part. I told Daniel on a Thursday night, in his truck, parked behind the hardware store with the engine off. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'm not ready for this, Nat. I don't think I can do this." I told him he didn't have to decide anything that night. I told him I just needed him to stay. He nodded like he was agreeing. 3 days later, his number was disconnected. I found out 2 weeks after that he'd moved in with his cousin in another state. I didn't go to my parents right away. I wasn't naive. I knew what mattered most to them was what the neighbors thought, what the other committee mothers whispered about after church. But some small, stubborn part of me still believed that when it came down to it, they'd choose me. I was 19 weeks along when I finally told them, sitting at the kitchen table where I'd eaten every dinner of my childhood. My mother's face didn't crumble the way I expected. It hardened. "Who else knows?" she asked. "Not are you okay? Not what do you need? Who else knows?" My father didn't look up from his plate. "You understand what this does to us," he said quietly. "Your mother is up for chair of the spring gala committee. Do you understand what people will say?" I laughed once, in disbelief, because some part of me still thought this was a test, that any second they'd soften. They didn't soften. For 3 weeks, they treated me like a stranger renting a room in their house. My mother stopped making eye contact at the table. My father started coming home later. I told myself it was shock. I told myself it would pass. It didn't pass. It became something worse. I woke up a few minutes past midnight to my bedroom light switching on, and my mother standing over my bed, already dressed, my suitcase already packed on the floor beside her. "Get up," she said. "Get dressed. Your father's waiting in the car." I asked her what was happening. She wouldn't answer. I asked again in the hallway. She still wouldn't answer. It was only in the driveway, standing in my nightgown in October, that my father finally spoke. "We spoke to Pastor Whitman today," he said, not looking at me. "He agrees it's best if you stay somewhere else until you sort this out. We can't have this associated with our name right now." "This," I said. "You mean the baby?" He didn't answer that either. They drove me 11 miles to the bus station on the edge of town, my one suitcase in the trunk, Grandma Rose's tin box wrapped in a sweater on my lap, because some instinct in me had grabbed it off the shelf before we left. My mother never got out of the car. My father set my suitcase on the curb like he was dropping off a stranger's lost luggage. "Call us when you fix this," he said. "We'll figure out what to tell people." Then he got back in the car, and I watched their taillights turn the corner and disappear. Sit with that for a second, because I've never fully been able to. 20 years old. 5 months pregnant. Standing alone outside a closed bus station at 1 in the morning, holding a suitcase and a rusted tin box of recipe cards, because that's what my parents decided their reputation was worth. I didn't cry that night. I remember being surprised by that. Some part of me had already made a decision standing on that curb, that whatever came next, I wasn't going to spend my life waiting for two people who'd already made their choice. That was the last time either of them touched my life for 15 years. The station clerk took pity on me around 2 in the morning and let me sit inside instead of on the bench out front. I remember pressing my hand flat against my stomach and whispering the only promise I had left to make. "It's just us now," I said. "And that's going to be enough." I didn't know yet how many nights I'd end up repeating that same sentence. Lily was born on a Tuesday in March, in a hospital I could barely afford, with a nurse named Carla holding my hand because there was no one else to call. For the first year, we lived in a room above a laundromat that a woman named Carmen rented out cheap because the water heater barely worked. Carmen owned the diner next door, and she was the first person in months who looked at me like I wasn't a problem to be managed. She caught me one night warming a bottle over a stove burner because our hot plate had broken, and the next morning she offered me shifts washing dishes off the books so I could bring Lily in a laundry basket and keep her behind the counter where I could see her. I want to be honest about what those years actually looked like, because I think people hear the word struggle and imagine something softer than it was. There were nights I ate crackers for dinner so there'd be enough left for formula. There was a February when our heat got shut off for 11 days, and I kept Lily warm by sleeping with her against my chest under every blanket we owned. I worked at that diner, then a laundry service, then cleaning offices at 5 in the morning before Lily woke up, because someone had to be home when she did. I still have the tin box. Grandma Rose's recipes came out of it slowly, one at a time. Over those years, a cornbread I made for Carmen as a thank you, a soup I started making in bigger pots when Carmen asked if I'd cater her sister's birthday. I didn't know yet that I was building anything. I only knew that cooking was the 1 hour of the day I didn't feel like I was drowning. Lily's first word was more. She was barely a year old, sitting in that laundry basket behind Carmen's counter, pointing at a bowl of Grandma Rose's rice pudding. Carmen laughed so hard she had to sit down. I remember thinking I would have gone through every one of those 11 cold nights again just to hear it. I called my mother twice that first year. The first time, no one answered. The second time, she picked up, and I heard my father's voice in the background asking who it was. There was a long pause. Then she hung up without a word. I didn't call again. By the time Lily was 4, I was catering small parties out of Carmen's kitchen after hours, birthdays, retirement lunches, a wedding shower that turned into 3 more weddings by word of mouth alone. I was exhausted in a way I don't think I can fully describe to you. But for the first time since that night on the curb, I wasn't waiting for anyone to save me. I was building something with my own hands, and nobody was taking it from me in the middle of the night. By the time Lily started kindergarten, I had a name for what I was building, Rosewood Catering, after the grandmother who taught me every recipe that fed us through those years. I won't pretend the next decade was easy, because that would insult everyone who's actually built something out of nothing. There were failed contracts, a kitchen fire that set us back 4 months, a year I did payroll for 2 part-time cooks before I paid myself a single dollar. But Rosewood grew, from Carmen's kitchen, to a rented storefront, to a real commercial kitchen with my name on the lease, to contracts with hotels and event companies across the state, and eventually, 3 years ago, a national catering company with clients in 11 cities. Let me say this plainly, because I think it matters. None of it was about proving my parents wrong. I stopped thinking about them most days, somewhere around Lily's 7th birthday. I built Rosewood because it was mine, because Lily deserved a mother who wasn't drowning, and because that tin box had already handed me the one thing my parents never could, proof that someone in that family had loved me without conditions. 6 years ago, I met Marcus, an event coordinator who booked Rosewood for a client and then kept finding reasons to call after the contract ended. He was patient in a way I didn't know men could be. He never once tried to be Lily's father, and somehow that made him one anyway, slowly, over years of school pickups and skin knees, and one nervous dinner where he asked Lily, not me, if it would be all right if he married her mom. There's a promise I made to a scared 20-year-old on a bus station bench that never really left me. It's just us now. And that's going to be enough. Watching Lily now, I think that promise came true a long time before any magazine noticed. 2 months ago, a business magazine called Meridian Weekly put me on their cover for a feature on women-owned companies that crossed the $100 million mark this year. Lily helped me pick the blazer for the photo. She was so proud she set it as her phone background. I didn't think about my parents once during that entire shoot. They thought about me, though. 3 weeks after the issue hit newsstands, they were standing at my gate. I watched them on the security camera for almost 10 minutes before I opened it. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, her hair fully gray now, her hands wrapped around each other the way they used to when she got nervous at church functions. My father stood a step behind her, and for the first time in my life, he looked like a man waiting for permission to speak. When I finally opened the gate, my mother's eyes went straight past me, searching the yard. "Is she here?" she asked. "Is Lily here?" "Not are you okay?" Not even hello. 15 years, and the first question out of her mouth was still about what she wanted, not about what she'd done. "She's inside," I said. "Doing homework." Because that's what teenagers do on a school night. My mother's eyes filled, and for a moment I almost mistook it for something real. "We just want to know her," she said. "We've made mistakes, Natalie. We know that. We're not asking you to forget everything. We just want to be grandparents." My father cleared his throat. "People change," he said. "We were scared back then. Scared of what people would think. We were wrong." I let that sit in the air for a moment, because I noticed neither of them had said the word sorry. Not once. What they'd said was that they were scared. What they'd said was that they were wrong, the way you describe weather, not choices. "You didn't come here because you're sorry," I said. "You came because you saw my face on a magazine and realized the daughter you left on a curb built something you could finally be proud of. If Rosewood had failed, if I was still working at a diner somewhere, you would never have knocked on this gate." My mother started to protest. I raised my hand, not in anger, but the way you'd stop a car before it ran a light. "I'm not saying that to hurt you," I said. I'm saying it because it's true, and I spent too many years of my life being polite about things that were true. I told them what I had never said out loud to anyone but Marcus, about the bus station, about the tin box on my lap, about the 11 days without heat, about a little girl saying more over a bowl of rice pudding like it was the greatest thing she'd ever tasted, because it was the only thing there was. My father, to his credit, didn't argue with any of it. He stood there and took every word, and something in his face finally cracked open in a way I had never seen when I was 20 and needed it to. It didn't undo 15 years. But I noticed it, and some old, tired part of me was almost grateful to see it at all. Then Lily's voice came from behind me. She'd heard the whole thing from the doorway. "Mom," she said, "are these the people from the tin box story?" I had told her about Grandma Rose's recipes 100 times. I had never told her the rest of it, not because I was hiding it, but because I never wanted my worst chapter to become one of her bedtime stories. She'd simply put it together on her own, the way smart, watchful kids do. I looked at my parents and said the only sentence I'd been building toward for 15 years, without raising my voice, without a single ounce of anger in it. Just the truth, laid down flat. "This child has no grandparents," I said. "She only has a mother. And her mother is asking you to leave." My mother said my name once, quietly, like a question. I didn't answer it. My father took her arm, and after a long moment, they turned and walked back to their car. I stood at that gate a long time after their taillights disappeared down the street, the same way I once stood in a driveway watching a different set of taillights disappear, except this time, I was the one who got to walk back inside, into a warm house, to a daughter who was mine in every way that mattered. I won't tell you I felt triumphant. Mostly, I felt done. 15 years of a question I didn't even know I was still asking, would they ever choose me, finally had its answer, and the answer had stopped mattering long before they ever knocked on that gate. If any part of this story feels familiar to you, if you've ever been told you were an embarrassment, a mistake, a scandal to be managed instead of a daughter to be loved, I want you to hear this the way I finally learned it myself. Your worth was never theirs to decide. Family isn't the people who share your blood. Family is the people who show up, not to load your suitcase into a car and drive away, but to hand you a job scrubbing dishes so you can keep your daughter warm, or to marry you slowly over a decade of school pickups, or to ask, from a doorway, if the strangers in the driveway are the people from the tin box story. Grandma Rose used to tell me that recipes are how people remember you after you're gone. I think she was right about more than cooking. We're all just handing down what we know how to give. My parents handed me their silence. I've spent 15 years making sure I hand my daughter something else entirely. If you've made it this far, tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose yourself over the family that raised you? I read every one. My name is Natalie Brooks. 15 years ago, I was left on a curb with a suitcase and a rusted tin box. Today, that tin box sits on a shelf in a kitchen with my name on the door, and nobody is ever taking it from me again.